Hi everyone, welcome to today's Agile Friday. I'm Justin Burns from the Office of the CIO. I'll be your host today. Joining us is Jeanne-Marie Isola, Maureen Noonan, and Alan Chedalawada from the University of Washington. Jeanne-Marie, Maureen, and Alan will be talking about their Lean Agile Transition case study. This will be a 1-hour event with 30 minutes presentation from Jeanne-Marie, Maureen, and Alan, followed by 30 minutes Q&A. Using the chat window, you can send questions privately to me, Justin Burns, at any time, and we will forward them on to the presenters. Agile Fridays are a collaboration between the Office of the CIO and Results Washington. You can find out more and keep up to date at ocio.wa.gov/agile-fridays. Big thanks to Jeanne-Marie, Maureen, Alan, and all the University of Washington crew for helping us out today. With that said, I will turn control of the mic over to our presenters. Are you there?
Yes, thanks very much, Justin. This is Jeanne-Marie Isola, and I am the Finance Program and Enterprise Business Service Director at the University of Washington's UW Information Technology Division. And today I'm going to talk about a case study of work that we did within the finance program that was really all around stop starting work and start finishing work. And this alludes to the fact that our teams all had a huge stream of work requests coming in, and the way that things tended to work was that they would start something and then they'd get distracted and move on to something else, and they would continue that. And ultimately we had staff that were very fragmented across many projects, and actual delivery of a project, i.e. completing it, was low. So we wanted to take a technique called Agile Lean that was being used by specific project teams within our program and scale it across so that we could really manage the work and increase the number of projects we completed and increase the related throughput. So first I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues. We could not have done this without the folks that you see here. First, a big thanks to Alan Chedalawada from Net Objectives. Alan was really the consultant that provided us with the initial training and how to apply the methodology and how to build our business value criteria, create the product vision, and also provided us with coaching along the way. We set up a structure where our coaches were internal, and Alan trained them, and then they worked one-on-one with each of our teams. Justin already mentioned Maureen Noonan, who is going to be doing the second half of our presentation today, but I would also like to acknowledge Gwen Trentham, who is here with us today, and she's the Integrations and Reports Lead for the HR Payroll Modernization program now. At the time, she was responsible for one of the major teams in the finance program and provided a very strong leadership in getting Agile implemented across the program. And finally, Alan Hunter, who was also involved in the HR Payroll Modernization Project, he provided direct coaching to some of our mainframe legacy teams that had a little bit of a hard time getting their minds around this new methodology, but ultimately were very successful in implementing it. So to give you some context of the organizations that were involved in the Agile Lean effort, I'm showing a picture of the university organization chart here. The top two squares that are circled in red are the two organizations that were involved. Our financial management group falls within an organization called Finance and Facilities and is under a senior vice president for that group. And then the finance program falls within University of Washington Information Technology, which you see on the other side here. So these two organizations made up the total of 60 staff that went through all of the training and the related implementation activities. In addition to those two organizations, we had representatives from planning and budgeting that were the business product owners for the budget systems. And then we also had representatives from the College of Engineering and the School of Social Work who were really providing a campus perspective on all of these systems and their use of these systems. So when you look at the total composite of people that need to be involved in this effort, it really takes all three, both business, IT, and then that combined group that is forming the team that's actually developing the software. The business is really driving this from the goals perspective. They're setting the business value criteria, and they're saying what is going to provide the highest business value. And through the Agile Lean methodology, we met every 2 weeks with business product owners to continually review and adjust the value criteria to ensure that we were working on the right things and also demonstrating to them the work that we had done and the value that we had provided. IT and business together is really doing the detailed work on how to deliver that value and understanding our business capabilities, the workflows, using lean approaches to looking at process maps and identifying where both manual and automated efficiencies can best be gained when you look at the process holistically. And then finally, the team, which is a composite of business and IT. So you have subject matter experts on the team, you have trainers, you also have your business product owner, in addition to the developers. And it takes all of those folks working on the chunks of work that will deliver value over the 2-week sprint cycle so that you can quickly determine what is going to provide that highest business value in the shortest period of time. And some of the things that they use to do that are scenarios and personas. They also continually validate the approach with the product owner and use end user acceptance criteria to ensure that whatever is delivered meets the needs. And that's really all around how you achieve that value. So the vision that we set for ourselves was that we wanted to scale Agile Lean across the finance program to maximize on solutions using business-driven value criteria to ensure that that highest priority work was delivered. This next slide is really showing 2 different approaches to software development and why we found the Agile approach the most compelling. Prior to implementing Agile across the finance program, many teams used the waterfall approach, and for those of you who have been around for a while, you would recognize the approach where you go out to the business and you gather a lot of requirements and maybe you have them documented in some kind of big document, and you take that back and you start building the software. And what you get is something that represents whatever the requirement was that was identified, and then you get some more requirements built and you continue to build on that. And this happens over a period of time, and then when you finally have the final product, you throw it back over the fence, and maybe it doesn't look the way that they were expecting. So if you think about it from an Agile perspective, you're really delivering value in your very first increment. Maybe it's simple, maybe it's not very well defined, but you can definitely see a picture of a woman there. If you think back on the last example, you didn't even see a picture of a woman until the very end. But here you actually see a picture of a woman, and then your next iteration, you're just providing more details, and you're also saying, is this what you thought you were going to get? Maybe when they first saw the first picture of the woman, they said, yeah, but I thought there was supposed to be some mountains or trees in the background, or she's supposed to be wearing a dress or something like that. And so as you go along, and this would be what's happening within each of your sprint cycles, you're building more and more into that picture. And all the way along, you're asking, is this what you want? And where you aren't providing what's been requested, you adjust and you make it more similar to what your business partners are asking for. So ultimately, when you do deliver the final picture, it is in alignment with what your business partners are looking for. And what you're doing in that situation is you're delivering value early and incrementally, as opposed to over a long period of time, your users aren't seeing anything, and then suddenly they're getting something that isn't even exactly what they wanted. To follow this particular methodology of providing value over time, you have to have your business partners actively engaged each step of the way. And so that was one of our challenges in scaling this across the finance program. We had projects that were actually using Agile, but not all of them. So we had some scattered groups that were applying Agile principles, and then we had other people using a large variety of other methodologies to build out and enhance software. So we did scale it to this program level, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that involved, and then Maureen will continue that conversation. And then finally, we have not taken it to the organizational level, but Alan Chetal-Lawata has some very interesting stories about taking it to organizations of 5,000 plus, where it has been very beneficial across that organization in helping team agility. And Alan, I'm sure, could answer questions about that when we get to the question and answer period. But as I mentioned, that scaling is really providing team agility across your organization. And we really have noticed this within the finance program because shortly after we completed the phase 2 implementation, 2 of our teams were asked to join forces and become one team to deliver something called open PO balances. And that project was highly successful and was a very quick project. We were able to deliver very quickly. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that the teams had the same language, they had the same roles and responsibilities, they had the same sprint cycle. So there wasn't any time spent on how to go about doing the work. That was a given, and they were able to easily just jump in and start doing the work. So the consistency, the value focus, the visibility, common terminology and roles, lean principles, all really helped in that. And we call our groups that are delivering this value pods, and they often are cross-functional, and they're collective ownership in terms of both business and IT and self-organizing. These are the 5 work teams within the finance program that we scaled the Agile Lean methodologies to. Each of these work teams has about, I would say, 5 to 10 members, and each of these were using widely different practices before we started to implement this. In March was when we kicked off our effort, and we kicked that effort off with 2 different training scenarios. The first one was a business product owner training, and that was a one-day training that we had all of the managers within financial management as well as all of the managers within the finance program go to really kind of learn the general principle and approach around being a business product owner and what that meant. Our executive sponsors also attended this training for the first 3 hours, so they had an overview of what we were trying to do and why. Once this training was complete, we then had all of the managers and product owners join their teams, and each team went through 3 days of training. And in that training, they focused on their projects and their products, and they created a vision, they defined their business value criteria, they established who would be in what role and what responsibility, and how they would work moving forward. At the end of that training, we started what we called Sprint Zero, and the work of Sprint Zero was to complete and refine the vision and the business value criteria and how they were going to be managing their sprint, what we call sprint ceremonies, but really are meetings around sprint planning, sprint demos, and retrospectives. And then we kicked off Sprint 1 as a program team, so everybody was on the same 2-week sprint cycle at the conclusion of the team training. With this, I'm going to hand it over to Maureen that's going to talk more about some of the detailed work we did in Phase 1 and also some of the results we got back when we surveyed our business partners and our IT staff about how well this went, and then what we did in the second phase. So with that, I'll let Maureen take it.
Thank you, Jeanne-Marie. So as Jeanne-Marie said, this was a phased effort, and I'm going to walk you through some of the nuts and bolts of what we did. Next slide. In Phase 1, March through June, we had 3 distinct deliverables. One was the book of work, which included coming up with business value criteria. 2 was to have everybody on a common cadence and start using common practices. And 3 was to have visible boards for each pod or work team. In this series of photos, this is directly from one of the training sessions with, again, business and IT both in the room. You'll see that we came up on the left-hand side, we came up with business value criteria collectively across the program altogether, and then we ranked ordered them in terms of what was most important for the University of Washington. In the middle photo, you see us applying those criteria to real work. People were told to come with their backlog, their actual backlog. So again, these working sessions were on actual work, not just training, but getting a jump start on using these processes. In that third photo is where we had the kind of proof of concept, and we tested, are our criteria working for us? Are our weighings working for us? Are we getting the top priorities as we would expect? And we did spend significant time on coming up with the business value criteria and testing them out, tweaking them, and making sure that they would work for us in our context. Next slide. Again, those value streams Jeanne-Marie talked about, these are the pods. The idea was to not have them be working in silos, but to have that holistic approach and to have the prioritization be something that we all agree to across the product lines, because there are times when we do need to swing people over to another product, as Jeanne-Marie mentioned an example of that, the open PO balance. So we need to be clear about what we're not working on when we do that and what we are working on and why. Next slide. This is the end result, our book of work, a current view. This took quite a bit of effort, trial and error to get into this format, so don't expect to hit the ground running at this level right away. I'll walk you through some of the key elements of this. In the first column, you'll see those pods or value streams, product lines. We also have something we call, in the rows 2 and 3, something we call the all program. So those are initiatives that tend to be technical renewal or larger university initiatives, such as our HR payroll replacement, that transcend all the teams and impact all the teams. Where you see these rows of white, that's our WIP. So that's what's active in process. The gray is the backlog. The gray rows are the backlog. And then that buffer tan color is reserved for incidents. So generally incidents will trump all the other work because you have to swarm to fix something. If you look over in the final column, you see these orange bars. Those are the final scores based on all the weighing we did. And what you'll see here is everything that's active in white has a higher score than everything in the backlog. We didn't start out that way, but by having this level of visibility and transparency, we were able to understand what we were working on that was costing us, from preventing us from working on something more important. So we were able to rectify that and have a consistent way of scoring and a consistent way of determining priorities. In the middle columns, the green are the 5 business value criteria, and I'll say more about that in a minute. The columns I, J, and K, the red, blue, and gold, those 3 are urgency, which means how soon does something need to be done, level of effort or T-shirt size is the blue one, and then technical risk. The urgency may change, would likely change over time as things become more imminent. So we have high is reserved for something that needs to be done in 0 to 3 months. The T-shirt size also may change based on discussion that we have and determining what is most important to work on, because if something is sized as an extra large, it's going to drop down in its final score because there's opportunity cost there. If something is an extra large, it means you're not working on other things. So this helps us to understand when we need to rescope a project and to be very thoughtful about what the highest value component or feature of that product is, so that we can get it into the WIP. Next slide. So the business value criteria we came up with, again, in the training with business and IT at the same time. Oh, and I do want to mention, when we do the ratings on the values of our initiatives, that is done by the business side. It's not IT deciding, with the exception of technical risk. That is, generally it's a shared conversation, but technical risk is the only column that IT owns. These are the criteria we came up with in the training sessions, and we evolved over time: improve capabilities, mitigate risk, enhance user experience, reduce cost, and compliance. And as I said, we also determined which of these were most important. So, for example, there's higher weight on compliance and improving capabilities than the other three. Next slide. Also in the book of work, we have these definitions and guardrails, that we call them, which is a guide to help determine how to rate something. Is it low, medium, or high? And this is really important for consistency across the program. As Jeanne-Marie was saying, the idea is to scale the Agile practices so that they are consistent, and that when you do reform teams, that you're all using the same common language, common approach. In the last column, there were certain rules around when you can use high, and that's helpful for not having inflated scores, which, of course, all of our children are important. We want everything to be high, but this is a good reality check. So, for example, high can only be used if it's operationally necessary when it comes to compliance. That's just an example. Next slide. This is the formula we use to come up with that final score, and how we do the weighing and the different values to, again, this low, medium, high. If you look at the formula all the way over the right, you see that all the other criteria are divided by level of effort. So that's how important that level of effort is, that T-shirt size. And that's why, again, if you set something as an extra large, you're going to get dinged in terms of value because it's going to suck up so many resources. So again, rescoping projects is something that we're getting better at and focusing on more and more. Next slide. This is another kind of view of the slide Jeanne-Marie showed with the define, design, and submit to team, those phases. Everything we do starts with the business strategy. And we're trying to, again, get past that throwing things over the fence. We want everyone at the table to make decisions and come up with what's most important. So everything we work on starts with the business strategy, and then it gets broken down into minimum business value increments. That's the level that goes into the book of work, and from there we can break it down into features, user stories. And the lean efforts are being worked on by the business when those initiatives are started up. What was happening is they would come up with a solution, hand it off to IT, and then we would have to do rework in terms of what they actually wanted, what the user stories were. Sometimes their solutions were features that already existed they just didn't know about. So we're getting better at having IT and business further upstream working together. And so we're no longer, well, our intention is to no longer have this rework around user stories and around the lean efforts. Next slide. At the end of each phase, we communicate a newsletter to everyone who is in the training, business partners, executive level, all the stakeholders, really. Excuse me. Some of the things we talk about are accomplishments for that phase. So again, this was just a period, and we got the book of work completed, the value criteria consistent and being used on a regular basis. As Jeanne-Marie said, every 2 weeks we the priorities. We have everyone on a common cadence. You see on that calendar there's a 2-week sprint cycle everyone's on. It starts on Tuesday, the same Tuesday. We have the visible boards, and each board has a vision. It has the roles, the complexity factors, definition of done. So all the boards have some common elements to them. And you'll also see in those photos on the bottom left for our Gemba walks that we did during this time. We had, for those of you who know Lean, a Gemba walk is, or don't know Lean, a Gemba walk is when you go to the place where the work happens. And you go, you ask questions, and you try to understand. We had 3 Gemba walks. One was by all of the managers in information management. There were 20+ people, managers, directors, associate vice president. It was very well received, and they really enjoyed seeing firsthand how much work had been done. We also had a Gemba walk with the product owners, or the core team, the business product owners. And again, they very much were impressed at how quickly, not only how quickly the teams were up and running, but how much it helped to reduce stress to have this visibility so that everyone knew exactly what they were working on, and it was very clear what was in the pipeline and what was being done in these 2 weeks. Our third Gemba walk was for the pods to go visit each other. So the frontline staff got to see each other's pods and pick up some best practices and kind of make some adjustments to their own boards. I know some of the folks that we invited in from the outside to see these walks commented at how they really could see the commonalities across the board. So even though there may be subtleties in the way they implement them, but there's definitely the common language and common practices happening. So next slide, our survey results for phase 1 showed that the number one thing most improved was that increased transparency across the program. There was pretty much agreement across the board that transparency was really valuable. Also got high marks improving interactions between business and IT, clarifying roles, consistent intake prioritization, common cadence, that sprint cycle, visibility across the program, and focusing on the highest business values. So we were really hitting our target in this first phase. The thing that was a little mixed bag was the work in process, reducing the amount of work in process. It was 40% improvement, 40% not. I would attribute that to some work, as Jeanne-Marie said, some groups were already doing Agile and they understood the concepts of work in process. For others, it's a little counterintuitive to think, actually, if you're working on fewer things, you're delivering more over time, versus having too many balls in the air where you're actually not finishing anything. That's the title of Stop Starting and Start Finishing. Again, this was back in the end of June, and we've come a long way in terms of the work in process and having it being really narrowed down to just the most critical things and getting them done. Next slide. In phase 2, July through December of last year, our deliverables were to have some enhanced information about the roles, expectations, and consistency around the roles, to create a program-wide board, to have common practices and ceremonies, and to increase our maturity, and also to create and use some of the artifacts, for example, top line and feature burn-up reports. Next. In terms of roles, this is an excerpt from our roles document. It actually has many more columns and a few more rows. What's really important is that transparency and having a name in each box, so understanding who's responsible for what. What you'll notice is you'll see several names in several boxes. So some, for example, Sue Camber is responsible for 3 systems out of these 5. Mike Anthony has different hats, as does Aaron Fay and Jan Sullivan. This is really helpful to have this level of understanding about what we're expecting of people and how many hats they're wearing, and does that make sense. And it's really helped us to have those conversations about and actually reduce frustration about what's expected of people. In addition to that, on the next slide, we have more detail about expectations. So this tells us how much time commitment is expected from each role, what the definition of each role is, when you need to be at a meeting, and when it's it depends, you know, if on the work, or if it's just on an as-needed basis. We actually were prompted to make this because there was just a little confusion, especially on the business side, about what was expected of people. So this was really helpful to level set exactly what was happening in these meetings and what the roles were responsible for. Next slide. Our all-program board, we actually had intended to create this in phase 1, but we realized that we didn't have enough information to create it. So that's one recommendation I would have, is hold off a little bit until you know more before you try to attempt an all-program board like this. This is in one of our main conference rooms. In that middle section is everything that's active. Every active project is listed there, along with its progress, estimates in terms of story points, the status of each, the intersections with other initiatives, and any challenges and risks. Over on the left, you'll see some of those artifacts I was talking about, the top line report and the feature burn-up report. Those are forecasting tools. They also show us progress on current initiatives. So if we see something that's 90% completed, we can swarm on it and get it done. In the forecasting side, we have milestones marked out. We know our velocity, that's also listed on this board. And so we can predict our finish date. And we tweak the estimates every sprint cycle as we know more information. It also helps us in planning. For example, if someone's going to be on leave for 3 months, we build that into these charts, and then we can make decisions and have conversations about, do we hold off on this other project and swing resources over to this project, or just figure out what do we do about that. But it's really helpful to not get blindsided and to have these forecasting tools. And with our HR payroll replacement product coming online, this is even more important to be able to look ahead and do that level of planning. Next slide. End of phase 2, our newsletter, again, talked about the roles and the more clarity around the roles, our all-program board, which, by the way, our all-program board we use in our core team meetings, so those monthly business partner meetings. We also use it in the Scrum of Scrum meetings every other week. So all the teams get together and do a Scrum of Scrum standing in front of that board. Another thing we focused on in phase 2 was the maturity around common practices. We had Alan Chedalawada come in for 4 hours per team and do a special session just around maturity and around their reporting, around how they're doing with their stakeholders. Through that, we were able to come up with a meeting around ceremony. So we had a special all-program meeting where everybody talked about how they did their stand-ups, how they did their demos, retrospectives, grooming, planning meetings. And the output of that was some common best practices that all the teams are using now. Also on this newsletter, you'll see off to the right, there's this little slide that has the green, yellow, purple. That's the electronic status report for reporting to stakeholders and executives. And now that is very easy to build and keep updated because we have the book of work and we have the program-wide board. So all the information is readily available. Nobody has to go hunt it down or guess. It's all right there in real time. So next slide. That was phase 2. What we're looking at now is being more intentional about the hookup between Lean and Agile. So you see on the left, there's that Lean board that exists down in the business offices, and one of their top priorities is this Open PO Balance project. And here it is on our top line report, Open PO Balances. This is the first initiative that we actually had a heads up, kind of like early involvement in a Lean effort. So now in our forecasting tool, you can see where that milestone will hit, and then we can keep aligned in terms of making progress on it and our estimates on it. Some other things we're working on in phase 3 right now is, as Jeanne-Marie said, scaling more to that portfolio level, especially with these broader projects like the HR payroll replacement, our IT service management initiative. These are projects that are, not owned by this group, but we're responsible for executing on. So because we're all set up with this Lean Agile approach, we're able to absorb that and plan better. We're also constantly working on advancing our maturity and making sure that all the teams are, at a certain level and that we're not leaving any teams behind. And then with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jeanne-Marie to talk about some of our lessons learned and best practices.
Okay, so I think there are just some top takeaways based on this experience that resonate with me anyway. For sure, having a combined approach that involved business and IT really helped us generate this level of success that we were looking for in terms of helping our business partners better understand the work we were doing and also giving them the ability to influence that work and ensure that they were getting what they needed from us. The executive sponsors were very key. Their support really symbolized that they valued this effort and that they wanted their staff to be a part of it. We had 2 business sponsors and then also the vice president from information management. Setting up consistent sprint cycles and having consistent roles and responsibilities and clear time frames around what needs to happen in each sprint cycle built in a level of consistency that allowed the program teams to better create new teams, swarm around areas that needed attention to get completed quickly. So all of that was extremely helpful. The book of work, I think, provided a lot of transparency to our business users. We were very easily able to pull off the active projects and create a biweekly status report. And for the first time, the business partners felt like they had their hands directly on the pulse of the work that was being done in our organization. And then finally, I think the idea that it is a maturity model. When we first implemented it, we had folks that had never used Agile principles or approaches, and then we had other folks that considered themselves to be experts in a particular way of doing Agile. And in both of those cases, we were asking people to do something different. So there was a big change component involved. And so you have to adopt it over time and acknowledge that that people are going to have to make changes if you're going to try to get a level of consistency across a group of people. And change, of course, is always hard, but once you can move through that, you really can generate the value of those consistent practices. So with that, I'll wrap up and open it up for questions. I think, as I mentioned, my colleagues Gwen Trentham, Maureen Noonan, and Alan Chadalawada are all here, as well as myself, to help respond to any questions that come up.
All right. Well, that concludes today's presentation. Jeanne-Marie, Maureen, and Alan, thanks. So as Jeanne-Marie mentioned, we're moving on to the Q&A portion. We have time for a little over 20 minutes of Q&A. Using the chat window, you can send questions privately to me, Justin Burns, or via public chat if you prefer. So we have one question that was, looks like we have questions rolling in pretty good. All right, we had one that was asked before we concluded. Carly was asking what, for a definition of the acronyms on the top of the slide talking about program roles. Can you possibly back up to that slide?
Sure. Is it the program roles and responsibilities? Is that?
Let's see. She said it was in a table. I think it was near the end.
Keep going. Yeah,
just a couple minutes ago.
So the next slide shows.
There it is.
Sorry,
yep.
Jeanne-Marie, go ahead. Those acronyms. Go ahead, Jeanne-Marie. Those are the systems.
So this acronyms up above here are our systems. So BGT stands for the budget system. GABS is our grants budget system. Fin and FastTrans is our finance system. OASIS is our fixed asset system. And then EFEX is our faculty effort reporting system. So, you know, for each of those systems, we're calling them pods. This is a subset of the roles that we have folks filling on that group.
All right, great. Well, thank you. Next question is from Prab, and they ask, what tool was used to create the reports, the visual design portion?
That was something we worked with Net Objectives on, and the book of work is in Excel. It's an Excel. And then it also is the same tool we're using to generate the frequency burn, or the feature burn up and the top line reports. And The feature burn-up and top-line reports are taken from, if you get to, let's see, this slide here, this minimum business increment is what you're seeing in the book of work, but then there's a lower level set of detail, which is the features associated with that minimum business increment, and that's what we generate that feature burn-up report from, and that's what's really helping us measure our velocity. And then from each of those features, we're doing user stories. Right-size stories is really meaning what work can you do within the 2-week sprint and deliver value. So you may not do the entire user story, but you can do a piece of it that delivers value, and that's where this right-size story comes in. And then those are broken up into tasks that are done over the 2-week sprint cycle.
All right, great. Our next question comes from a group at Department of Health. I just wanted to give a special shout out to everybody that's calling in as a group today. We love knowing that there's conference rooms of people all watching this. So thanks a lot for that, and thanks to everybody else as well. Our next question from Department of Health. Is the slide deck going to be available? Yes, absolutely. We always post the slide decks, usually same day, definitely by Monday morning, as well as a recording of the presentation. So that will definitely be available. So let's see, the next question coming up. So how important to your process was it looked like you guys were in pretty much all physical artifacts here other than the book of work. Were there any other major electronic artifacts, or was this almost entirely a physical operation?
I think that some of the teams used tools there's one tool called Jira. Gwen, what's the one?
Right. Well, for tracking tasks during the sprint, each team has a tool. So we're using Team Foundation Server for the actual work items and ticketing within the sprint and reviewing the work and documenting exit criteria. These feature burn-up charts, they're all in an electronic Excel sheet, and we have them available on the central SharePoint site. So that's how they're generated and then just printed each sprint for demonstrating the results on the larger board. We have other tools that the teams also have been using for tracking. We have Request Tracker and other ticketing systems as options.
Gotcha. Okay. And Lisa actually asked the question that was on my mind also. What version of TFS are you using for this?
I think we just recently upgraded, so I think it whatever the most recent version is. I think it might be 2013.
Yep. Great. Yeah, TFS is a great product, but it just had such a huge jump in functionality. 2012 became at top class, in my opinion. All right, next question. Department of Ecology asks, could you talk about how you're doing on your goal of stop starting and start finishing?
I think we're doing a lot better because we now have a handle on what people are actually doing, and our book of work is identifying what they're actively working on versus what they're not working on at all. And then through the feature burn-up charts, we can see the velocity or how quickly they're moving through those. And then we've instigated within each of the sprint planning cycles the responsibility of the teams to actually go through and groom the book of work. So that would be the point where they actually say, we completed this active project. And then the way that we have the book of work set up, the project falls to a list of completed projects that's at the very bottom of the book of work. And then they can choose to activate something in their backlog if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think one of the more powerful aspects of all being in a similar metric process and using common dimensions for measuring velocity is as a team gets bigger or smaller, people go on vacation or are being asked to work on other projects, you can adjust your planned work for that sprint because you've learned the velocity based on the number of people that are participating, and so you can become more predictable in what you can accomplish. And so that, I think, helps finish the work and be more predictable and be more reasonable about what work you take on because you start seeing, you're reviewing that every 2 weeks. You learn better how to estimate and how to predict that.
And then I think you can provide that information to your business partners very concretely. You know what you're going to be able to deliver on, and you know when you're going to be able to deliver it, and when it will be completed because you're focusing on one thing.
And I would also add that, this is Maureen, in terms of start-finish, the completion criteria is really invaluable. Without that, you know, we have a lot of achievers who want to do more than ask them and do better, but having the completion criteria that we've worked with the business on helps us to know when we're done, because in the past we just didn't know when we were finished. So that's something that I find is almost enlightening. Oh, you can determine ahead of time what done means. So that's been helpful.
It prevents that over-engineering or overbuilding.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that flows all the way down into the task level, the exit criteria, is just so the team working on the work knows what done means for each task, and then you just scale that up to each level that you're looking at in the features and MBIs.
All right, great. Anything else? All right, we'll move on to the next question. Patty asks, how do you use the book of work versus a traditional product backlog? How does that differ? Or does it replace the backlog?
The book of work is the view that is scaled across the program, and so you have, looking at this chart that's on the screen, the MBIs are what you're seeing in the book of work. So those could be anywhere from a 3 to 6 month effort, is just one line item. As you get that work broken down into features and user stories, your more traditional product backlog, when you think about it, is a list and a collection of user stories. And so the book of work is really representing the scaling of your backlog at a higher level.
Okay, so would those be similar to epics then, MBIs?
Potentially. Maybe I would defer to Alan to comment on that one.
Yeah, so MBIs they're the release increments of value. So they may contain epics. I would liken epics to more like features. But so MBIs are release increments of values.
I see. So it's about the focus of the item rather than necessarily the scale, although it sounds like they tend to be larger items. Exactly. Gotcha.
I mean, you could have a production support request, but as soon as you fix it, it's releasable. So in effect, that's an MBI. These are planned for. If we have an initiative, we want to see what increments can we release so that we can get value on an ongoing basis, and that's what an MBI is.
I see. And does that term and approach come from Lean World or Agile World?
I don't know the answer to that. I would say it's a term we've been using. So of a business value chunk, what's the minimal business increment that we can release of highest value? And that's what we're looking at.
Gotcha. I can't speak for everyone, but I found the book of work to be a really interesting concept and really liked learning more about that. So, all right, moving on to our next question here. Department of Health asking, are the team members on projects and maintenance and operations at the same time, or are individual people dedicated to the project or to maintenance?
We have our team members on both, so they're managing both their operations and maintenance and project work. And that's why the business product owner is so critical in this, because they are making judgment calls about the priority of the maintenance and operations work against the project work, and really helping direct the team into what they consider to be the highest best value. One of the reasons you saw incidents in the book of work was just to acknowledge the fact that there are certain break-fix items that we don't have a choice about. We just get it done. And that really isn't something that the business product owner would be asked to weigh in on. But everything else, we work with our business product owner, and they kind of identify the sequence and the focus.
All right. Our next question. ESD, group from ESD, asks, how do you ramp up a new team member?
So interestingly, we've had several new team members join throughout this process. And so typically what we want to do is get them through the training and make sure that they understand the concepts, and then expose them to participating on the team. Sometimes we have folks that come in with like Scrum Master training, or we've had people that come in with maybe a little bit different context around how to chunk the work. And so there tends to be a new opportunity for dialogue about how that fits into our methodology. But I think the power of the consistency, having a large group of people using a consistent methodology, has really inspired new people to want to learn and quickly get on board with how that works, and also add and enhance what we're doing with the knowledge that they bring to the table.
Yeah, on the EFEX team, we had a contractor come in and work, and just because the whole team working together every day and doing this repeatable process and encouraging participation by the full team, when you have a group that has established that norm, you bring one person in, it's easy for them to pick it up because they're immersed in this process that everyone else is sort of carrying on.
All right. So I have an interesting question for the three of you here. So you mentioned that you guys did regular retrospectives. One of the things that I'm familiar with in retrospectives is the exercise to what would you keep, what would you start, what would you stop. Were there any practices that you guys started out with that through the process of this being sort of a self-correcting process that you decided as a team to drop from your process?
That's a good question. I know from the EFEX team perspective, that's one of the teams that keeps getting brought up. We were doing things differently in our own Agile process. One of the things that we did was we, at every sprint, were very dedicated to figuring out the team's available hours and did estimates by hours when we broke them down into tasks, and we used that to define our sprint burn-up charts. So as we transitioned over into the new process, it's more driven on velocity and story points, and the story points have sort of a different meaning behind them than what the team was doing. And so for a while we used both hours and points to do our estimating, but then eventually just got rid of the hours, and it was sort of liberating for the team to not have to track that anymore and start relying on the story points to be more predictable and use that as a focus. So I would say that was one powerful thing that we stopped doing that we thought was adding value.
Okay, great. All right, we have about 8 minutes left. We have time for a few more questions if anyone wants to send one in here. While we wait, had another question for you. So was this, when you started this effort, were there other people around you that weren't doing this? And if so, were there any sort of cultural issues that arose by having one team that was doing this relatively radically different technique? Or was this across the board? Was everybody there in on this?
Well, I'll take a stab at it, and then I'll have Gwen join in. So across the finance program, we kind of had a mandate that everybody needed to learn this new methodology. But individual teams had been doing very different methods and approaches. And so we really kind of got a wide range of reactions from the different teams. There were some teams that were kind of like, oh, I already know this, you know, it's no big deal. And then we had other teams, particularly in our mainframe legacy systems, that felt like they didn't really need to learn anything because they were using this methodology, or they read up on it and it sounded just like what they did. So we had a really wide variety of kind of people's attitudes coming into the training. And interestingly, we found that the people that hadn't really done an Agile approach before, it was easier for them to adopt this methodology because they didn't really have any preconceived ideas about how it should be done. And then the teams that had already been doing Agile and, you know, maybe were working on 3-week sprint cycles and had kind of different ceremonies in place, they had the hardest time because they were having a hard time seeing the value as to why they were supposed to do it this way as opposed to the way they were doing it. And the value really was the ability across the program to have everything be consistent and then to leverage that moving forward. So Gwen, your team in particular struggled some on that. You could speak to that.
Right, and I think, I kind of talked through that example with estimating, but that was one of the places that was, we did estimating a lot and really had to change the strategy. One of the things with the new process, that teams every day are adjusting the points, and so that was sort of something we didn't do and thought it violated how we measured our velocity during a sprint because you wanted to retain what your original estimates were, but you learn through experimenting and doing it that the value pays off. In talking about, the finance program has all adopted this approach. When you're scaling it, each team will come up with their own unique implementation of it. So there are unique nuances, for example, what people show on their visual boards that are a little bit different and unique to the work that the team is doing and to the culture that it develops on the team itself. When the team still has to interact with other external groups, and so that's where we still have challenges in, the team's working on sprint, committed to this work. We need help from another team. They don't plan on a 2-week cycle. They need a 4-week heads up if they're going to help you. So it takes more thoughtful planning to engage with groups that are not using the process. So that is a continual challenge. I'm working on a project now where we're bringing together a lot of different groups that have all different styles of doing the process on their teams, and it's pretty amazing to see how much time and effort you spend just understanding people's timelines and how much heads up they need in their work style. The more of an organization that you can get working in a common way, the more that organization can achieve.
All right. Anyone else want to jump in there before we move on to the next question?
Just on a kind of side note to that is some of the, the initial responses around we're too busy to do this, and trying to get the understanding that, well, by doing this, you won't be so overwhelmed. So it's worth the investment up front. And especially around what Alan calls the shoulder taps. So, just those one-off emails, phone calls like, oh, this will just be 15 minutes and I can get it done. Well, those add up pretty quickly. So there was a little bit of challenge getting people to let go of that, especially because they have strong relationships with certain people, and there's a component of that where you're shifting those relationships. So it took a while for some teams, but we did get to the point where you could no longer just automatically respond and fix something, that it had to be very visible and planned about how you were going to handle those types of requests.
Okay. We had a request. Someone missed part of one of your answers, so if you wouldn't mind briefly summarizing the answer about ramping up a new team member. How does a new team member get ramped up?
I think providing them with the training is the first step, and then getting them involved in their team and participating in the sprint ceremonies, which include the planning, demo, and retrospective, and then actually getting them up to speed in terms of Agile approaches. Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much. So our next question, how did you get management to decide to move forward with the Agile Lean methodology? Well, I think that in the University of Washington, we were fortunate that our financial management business partners were implementing a very broad Lean initiative where they were mapping out their value streams and identifying efficiencies, and then had an entire methodology around how to implement those efficiencies, and they were seeing a lot of value. They did not really look at it from a technical perspective, so the work they were doing was very much around getting rid of handoffs and cycle time and that sort of thing, and not really looking at where automation could help improve efficiencies. And so what happened was they would just sort of send a laundry list of requests that came out of their lean efforts over the wall to us, and we really had no way of knowing what was the most important thing to work on. And those lean requests were coming in with a whole bunch of other requests, so it made it even more confusing. So what we asked is if we could partner with them to set it up so that we were kind of engaged at the front end when they were doing the lean work, and then we could leverage the Agile Lean approach to ensure that the business was prioritizing what those efficiencies were, and that they were looking at those efficiencies when they looked at their value streams and were determining where they could increase efficiencies, so that automation was included in that picture. And I think at the very end, very last slide, Maureen was showing where we applied the financial management's lean effort on eliminating encumbrances for procurement with the Agile approach, and that was our Open PO Balance project. And that project really demonstrated a lot of the value of scaling this program-wide and including our business partner, because all aspects of this, their lean value stream mapping incorporated all of the things that we needed to know in order to build the software, what needed to get done, and then they were a part of helping prioritize what needed to get built when, what were high-value chunks that we could release along the way.
Okay. Well, it's 12 o'clock. We're about out of time. We have one question left in the queue, and I suspect it might be a quick answer, so I just wanted to throw that in here real quick. Patty asks, what was the product owner training that you used with your product owners? Was there a particular product, or did you have a coach?
Well, we went with the Net Objectives Business Product Owner Training. That was the first training that we provided. But we also did have Alan Chadalawada come and coach our teams at different points along the way. And when he came and coached the teams, he would help work with each of the roles to make sure that they understood and knew what they were doing in the work setting.
All right, great. Thanks so much for answering that last question there. So it looks like we're out of time. Thank you, everyone, for your great questions. Next week, we're going to have Jeanne Richardson from Azure Gate joining us. I don't actually have her topic yet, so look for that email, and we will let you know very shortly. You can find out about what's coming up and view previously recorded webinars at ocio.wa.gov/agile-fridays. A big thanks to Jeanne-Marie, Maureen, and Ellen from the University of Washington, and also to Results Washington for helping to make Agile Fridays a success. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next time.